either into the green box or the yellow box. Now, what's interesting about this is we know from studies of infant development that we can measure attention or surprise in a nonverbal infant just by looking at his or her looking behavior. That is to say, typically, infants will look for a long time at surprising events. They won't look for as long at familiar kinds of events. So the question is, what will the infant do under each of these four conditions? And what you can see here is you've got looking time, okay, when the actor reaches into the yellow box or reaches into the green box. When the actor has the true belief that the watermelon is in the green box, the child is surprised and looks longer when the actor reaches into the yellow box. That's unexpected on the part of the child. The infant expects that the actor will look where the watermelon is. Here, where the actor has the true belief that the watermelon is in the yellow box, the child looks longer, is surprised, paying more attention, more interested when the actor does this unexpected thing. Here, where the actor has the false belief that the watermelon is in the green box, the infant looks longer when the actor unexpectedly reaches into the yellow box, does the counter-expectational thing. And then finally, when the actor has the false belief that the watermelon is in the yellow box, the child looks longer when the actor reaches in to the green box. Again, whenever the actor does something that does not correspond to the infant's understanding of what the actor thinks or what the actor believes, then the infant is surprised and looks longer. This is taken as evidence that, in fact, even children as young as 15 months have a theory of mind. That is, have an idea that other people have beliefs that are different from their own, beliefs that may be true or false. So what we're doing here is pushing the theory of mind, the acquisition of a theory of mind, back quite some number of years, so long as we can use a nonverbal version of the false belief test. In developmental psychology, the idea here is that even young infants have at least the rudiments of a theory of mind. For our purposes, what we're doing here is using the false belief test as a behavioral index of consciousness, as people's awareness of mental states as such, as mental states, as representations of the world outside. And it seems now that even 15-month-olds have this. That moves the results from the false belief test back closer in line with the results from mirror self-recognition. So the general idea here is that infants, just like young children, have a theory of mind. They have some idea about what other people believe. They have some idea about that those beliefs might be true or false, correct or incorrect. And in any event, they have some idea that other people's beliefs might differ from their own. And finally, even young infants, 15 months old, expect people to behave in accordance with their beliefs. If they know that the actor thinks that the watermelon's in the green box, they expect the actor to reach into the green box, not to reach into the yellow box. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that the development of the false belief task, the nonverbal version of the false belief task, not only allows us to ask an ontogenetic question about the origins of consciousness, that is, do even very young children have something like consciousness as measured by the theory of mind, but the availability of a nonverbal test, the nonverbal version of the false belief test, allows us to ask the same question about non-human animals. So now we're going to move back from the ontogenetic view of development to the phylogenetic view and use this nonverbal test of false beliefs as a way of assessing whether chimpanzees might have consciousness in this sense as well. So we know that some chimpanzees, at least, will pass mirror self-recognition as a test of consciousness. The question is, will chimpanzees pass a nonverbal version of the false belief test, showing that they have, again, at least the chimpanzee rudiments of this basic theory of mind mechanism. Okay. Mike Tomasello's laboratory has developed a nonverbal version of this false belief test that looks very much like the one that I told you about before, that can be used with chimpanzees. What happens here is that there are two human caretakers that the chimpanzees are familiarized with. One we'll call the hider, and the other one we'll call the communicator. And the communicator has been shown to the chimpanzee before to be a reliable source of information about the location of food. That over a period of time, the communicator has opened a bin and shown the chimpanzee that there's food in it, and not opened some other bin, and so on. So what happens here is that this other actor, known as the hider, will take a reward that the chimpanzee likes, a piece of fruit or whatever, and hide it in one or two of the containers in full view of the communicator, but outside the view of the chimpanzee. Then the communicator leaves the laboratory environment. So he's seen where the reward has been hidden. After the communicator leaves, the hider stays on the scene and then moves the reward from one container to the other in full view of the subject, in full view of the chimpanzee subject. Then what happens is the hider leaves, the communicator returns, and then marks for the chimpanzee which box the reward is in. And in this case, what the communicator does is to mark the old box as where the reward is. Okay, this is exactly analogous to the version of the nonverbal false belief test that Onishi and Baillargeon used. So now the question is, what box will the subject choose? When the chimpanzee actually goes to look for the reward, will the chimpanzee look for the reward where the hider put the reward, or will the chimpanzee look for the reward where the communicator says it is? And what you can see here is that what Colin Tomasello did was actually did this experiment with 4- and 5-year-old children as well. And 4-year-old children typically fail this test, so you got less than half, fewer than half are passing the test. 5-year-old children, about 85% will pass the false belief test presented this way. But you can see that the performance of chimpanzees is very, very, very poor indeed. In fact, lower than the performance of 4-year-olds. So by virtue of the evidence of this particular nonverbal version of the false belief test, chimpanzees don't have whatever kind of consciousness is required to pass the false belief test. This research on primate cognition has now developed into quite an industry. It's an industry that's slowing down now because we actually can't use primates in much research any longer. But a number of investigators have developed a whole test battery now for assessing intelligence in primates, assessing their physical skills, ability to deal with quantities, ability to make inferences about causality, and then various kinds of social skills, including nonverbal tests of theory of mind, much like the ones that I just discussed with you. A major study by Herman and his colleagues tested a whole bunch of chimpanzees, really large number of chimpanzees, not just 1 or 2 chimpanzees, a fairly large number of orangutans, and then a large number of children who were aged 2, 3, 4 years of age. When you look at ability to reason about space, it turns out that chimpanzees performed about as well as chimpanzees performed about as well as children. Orangutans fell down a little bit. Reasoning about quantity, again, chimpanzees and children performed comparably. Reasoning about causality, chimpanzees and children performed comparably. reasoning about physical dimensions, yes, that too. But when you look at performance on the theory of mind test, again, the chimpanzees and the orangutans fell down on this test, nonverbal test of theory of mind, compared to even these relatively young children, 2, 3, 4, the 4-year-old children. Again, here's another test of theory of mind, gaze following, whether if the experimenter moves his gaze from one place to another, the child will follow the gaze accordingly. Young children will do that. They'll look where somebody else is looking, but chimpanzees and orangutans tend not to do that. And then this is a more comparable false belief test. And again, the chimpanzees and the orangutans tend to do not very much better than chance on this test. Okay, so based on this kind of evidence, then, we'd have to say that some chimpanzees, may pass the mirror self-recognition test for consciousness, but they tend not to pass the false beliefs test on consciousness. That's pretty much where this sits at the moment, but I have to say that there are some problems with this literature that you should know about. That means that the experiments that are available so far are not really definitive. First, there are a bunch of confounding variables that infect this literature that we really can't do anything about, given the nature of the animals that people are able to work with. The first is that there's been no separation of chimpanzees and orangutans who were raised, who lived with their parents, for example, versus those who were raised in isolation in cages. Most laboratory the chimpanzees these days are raised in isolation because they're used primarily for medical research, and people want to know exactly what they've had in contact, that have been in contact with. And that's just an unnatural situation for a chimpanzee. And it might be, if you will, that the chimpanzee theory of mind has been retarded, as it were, by virtue of this very unusual rearing conditions. The second is, of course, these animals are all raised and confined in laboratory settings. And it's entirely possible that if we followed chimpanzees out in the real world, their environment, in Africa, for example, that we'd see plenty of knowledge of, plenty of behaviors reflecting knowledge of theory of mind. Franz de Waal, the great primate the ethologist at Emory University, has made just such a claim. He says, you go out in the wild, you see plenty of chimpanzee theory of mind. You see plenty of deception. You see plenty of things like that. You just don't see it in the laboratory because it's an unnatural situation. I think one of the most serious problems with this literature is the nature of the experiment itself. Think about the Call and Tomasello experiment for a moment. There's a chimpanzee who's watching two humans go about their business, the communicator and the hider. What the chimpanzee theory of mind test really asks the chimpanzee to do is to read a human mind, to be able to figure out what the human is thinking of. But that's not what we ask. That's not comparable to the question that we ask of young